politely welcome the Minister here tonight and note that he has come stating that he's in listening mode, but that simply is not good enough at this stage. Listening has been going on for a long, long time. The time for action and implementation has arrived, and the time for ending the pretence that the Fine Gael party has any interest in reforming the Seanad, ending that pretence has come this evening. There is no appetite in Fine Gael for reforming the Seanad. And I think that this can be fairly conclusively proven. We have to remember that it was a gimmick that inspired Enda Kenny when he was then, I think, leader of the opposition and fending off an internal dispute within Fine Gael. It was a gimmick to announce at a president's dinner at that party, or a national conference, or a president's dinner, or whatever it was, that he intended to abolish the Seanad. It was a shameful gimmick, which the Irish people eventually saw through. Senator Burke will have his opportunity. If the Seanad had been abolished, as Deputy Kenny, as he then was, proposed, the Constitution would have been in tatters thereafter. The checks and balances provided for in the Constitution would have ceased to exist. And I mentioned there are many there, and I needn't recite them all here, but I do make one thing clear. This House has many serious functions under the Constitution, and not least of which is that the assent of this House has to be obtained before the Government of Ireland surrenders our entitlement to unanimity on any issue in the European Union. This House has an absolute veto over that. And it's not just simply in relation to the removal of judges, and it's not just simply in relation to the removal of President, but this House is designed, and was always designed by Eamon de Valera when he was Taoiseach, to be independent of government. Why, if it was not designed to be independent of government, would it be the case that this House's will could be overridden after 90 days where it objected to legislation proposed in the Dáil? If this House was intended to be under the thumb, where it has been kept for most of the lifetime of the present Constitution, under the thumb of government, that provision would not be necessary. Likewise, this House has a great future in bringing to this legislature different voices which will not be heard simply filtering up through multi-seat PR geographical constituencies. I was up in Belfast recently with Senator Marshall, and I was looking at the vacant Senate chamber in Stormont. And it is now being widely understood in Northern Ireland that something like this House is needed in Northern Ireland, where civil society, elected on non-party lines by the electorate generally to represent different interests, is desirable in order to bring different points of view and to bring into the Oireachtas voices that would not otherwise be heard. Senator Dolan is an example. The university senators are examples of people who would not, in the ordinary course of things, either find their way up through the geographical multi-seat constituency system to a single-chamber cabinet, and whose voices would have been lost. And I just instance people like Mary Robinson, who in this House proposed that the law on contraception should be reformed, and was told by the then Archbishop of Dublin that she was bringing a curse upon Ireland. And this House was so much under the government's thumb at the time that it didn't even give her bill a first reading. It refused to allow it be printed. So you don't have to go back to Yeats in his speech about "we are no petty people." You don't have to go to Mary Robinson. You don't have to go to the countless other people who have contributed in this House over the years, who would not be here and would not be in Leinster House if we did not have a Seanad to prove the point that this House is one of huge value. I want to, if I may, just mention in particular Fergal Quinn. The late Fergal Quinn, as a member of this House, was a great statesman in terms of pursuing different topics and different interests of his in the national interest. And it's worthwhile reminding ourselves that the day after his funeral in Sutton last year, the day after his funeral, his last article for the Sunday Business Post was published posthumously. And that article speaks to us. And he points out the shameful way in which Seanad reform was apparently at that stage being abandoned and being put on the back burner and being put for further discussion or further polite listening with no action. Let's remember that Taoiseach Enda Kenny, when the public decided to keep this House, and it was in no way, little way, due to Fergal Quinn's immense popularity going around Ireland and standing in town squares where people flocked to him. And he reminded them of the value of the Seanad by his decency, by his simple decency. The Taoiseach, when he was defeated in that referendum, said the people of Ireland had given him a wallop. He had, during the course of the referendum, abased himself badly by trying to win the referendum by saying there would be no reform. He said there would be no reform of the Seanad if the people voted to keep it. That was a shocking statement to make. But it was designed to bully the Irish people into disbelieving the possibility that Seanad Éireann was capable of reform and needed to be reformed. And afterwards, when he was beaten, he slowly came round to the view that he would reform the Seanad because that was clearly the wish of the people in retaining Seanad Éireann. And he established, under the chairmanship of Maurice Manning, a group to advise him on how, without a referendum, the electoral system for the 43 vocational seats in this House could be reformed so as to make it more democratic and to take it away from simply the hands of 100 or 220 Oireachtas members and 1,100 odd county councillors. And Maurice Manning produced the report and it was handed up to government. And what did government do? And Maurice Manning's group took submissions from every party, looked at the subject matter inside out, and came up with what they were tasked to do, which was to establish a reform without another referendum. What happened then? Nothing. Until pressure came on for the formation of this government. And I want to pay tribute to Minister Catherine Zappone, who insisted that implementation of the Manning report be made an aim of the present government. That's in the programme for government, adopted and put before the Irish people. And what happened then? Absolutely nothing, procrastination and delay, until a private member's bill was put before this House by myself and others. And at that stage, at that late stage, we were told that the government wanted to establish an implementation group to deal with the matter. The implementation group worked long and hard, and I want to pay tribute to members of this House from all parties who worked with me to produce a report in accordance with the terms of reference which we were given. And we did that. And what was our thanks for doing that? Our thanks for doing that was to receive complete indifference from the government, and finally for the Taoiseach to stand up in Dáil Éireann and give the message that if somebody wanted to do something about this, he would not stand in its way. That's the present Taoiseach. And you know, in fact, the present Taoiseach, as Fergal Quinn pointed out in his posthumous article, was a person who at one time was an ardent advocate of Seanad reform. In 2007, when he was an earnest TD, only 3 months in office, he issued a press release announcing that he had conducted a survey of nominating bodies which play a key role at Seanad elections. He suggested that his, quote, survey exposes the urgent need for Seanad reform and went on to suggest that this should be the last time the Seanad is elected in this way. Those are the words of the young Tyro entering into the political domain. But now we see a very different Taoiseach, a man who languidly and disgracefully stands there and says, if somebody wants to do something about this, let them do it. Let somebody propose it in Dáil Éireann, and I'll allow, the grace of the man is extraordinary, I'll allow a free vote in the hope it will be voted down by people who are hostile to it. And this contrasts dramatically with, I have to say, the Judicial Appointments Commission Bill, which is driven by Senator Ross, and which is driven by Minister Ross, and which is the government bows down in acceptance of against the muted hostility of its members in this House, as explained to the media. Now, I don't expect Catherine Zappone to resign in protest about the way that the government has shabbily treated this issue. But to come in here as the Minister has, having established a group, and Minister Ross, of course, insisted on being in this group and then contributed nothing to its proceedings, except to try and obstruct my being made chairman of it. He made no constructive suggestions on the subject whatsoever at any point that I can recall. Minister Ross can have his way on judicial appointments, but this piece of major reforming legislation is thrown in the waste paper bin by this government. Members of this House, and I'll finish this, members of this House have nothing to fear from the passage of the bill which is appended to this legislation. And I recommended to the Taoiseach in my covering letter of the report that it should be initiated in Dáil Éireann and not here, because turkeys don't vote for an early Christmas. But members of this House do not have anything to fear, because the bill itself acknowledged that on the best estimates, they would get 1 or 2 more terms, most likely, of re-election under the present system before it fully came into effect. But it has been cynically foot-tripped as a report. The efforts put in by those members of the all-party group have been traduced. This is a shameful moment for the Fine Gael party. You have left yourselves.
You're over time, Senator.
You have let yourselves.
Sorry, Senator. Senator McDowell as the chair has the floor, but you're over time. 5 minutes.
I am concluding. You have let yourselves down very badly. The people will not be fooled. And if the next Dáil is the place where this must be dealt with, so be it. I hope there are people in that chamber who will do to this government what it richly deserves to have done to it. Kick it out, because it's a shamefully dishonest government which has conned the Irish people long enough.
Senator Buttimer, you have the floor.